Ready.
Okay, now this is the way I'm going to do. I better not get out of this. I was going to do full screen so you wouldn't see this on the left, but I better not do it because who knows what'll happen. Okay, so I'm going to do several things, but once I'm going to go through the trip, why we went, where we went, whatever. Then I'm going to show some maps and get us an idea of where, get you an idea on geography of it all. And then I'm going to show a few little slides of Nome, and then that's going to be it. And then I'm going to turn it over to Liam. So that should be 10 minutes or so from now. Okay, why in the world, in the first place, did we all want to go to Alaska? Well, as everyone knows who's a birder, that listing is a big thing. And people have city lists, yard lists, county lists, but the big thing in birding is the ABA listing area. So for an ABA or American Birding Association area. And for those that do not know about this, it starts at the Mexican border and then goes north up through North America, over into Alaska, Canada, and most recently, about 2 years ago, includes the Hawaiian Islands. That's in North America. So that's why we wanted to go there, because some of us particularly, there are areas in the ABA that you can get certain birds. Now, California is a big one. Arizona is a big one. Texas is a big one. Florida. And then the Midwest lakes around Ohio, Michigan. That's it for here. But to really get a lot of birds that are not ever down here or are only down here a little bit and are also close to the Far East, you got to go to Alaska. And that's why we ended up wanting to go there. Now, we went from the 1st to the 17th of June. And for months prior to that, we talked about, oh, we ought to go to Alaska. We ought to go to Alaska. And finally, someone said, are we going to go or aren't we? We got to plan this thing. So we decided somewhere around the end of March, maybe early April, that in fact, we're going to go. So we basically did is Liam, who was the leader of this whole thing, and asked us to share with him birds that we could probably see in Alaska that we needed to see that we never seen before. So we sent that to him, and then he basically used eBird. And for those of you that don't know what eBird is, it's basically a worldwide listing of birds that people have seen. So that's something that years ago, it wasn't there. But so Liam went through our list, went through the areas in Alaska where certain birds were probably going to be seen. And then on top of that, after we got there, he used, not us, mostly Liam, used eBird on a daily basis. And he basically searched the areas out near where we were at to see where birds had been recently seen. So it really worked out pretty well for everybody. All right, just a brief introduction of who had ever been there before. Of the four of us, Mike Scram had lived in Alaska when he was 5 years old, and then for a short period of time, and then he finally returned a little more than 70 years later. Lisa lived and worked for the Forest Service in Southeast Alaska for 12 years. So she was kind of the Alaska veteran there. And Liam had been there in 2 previous trips, birding when he was quite young. He's quite young now, so he was quite a bit younger then. And I was up one time to Homer, Alaska in 2008 for about 5 days. I was there just photographing bald eagles, and it snowed every day, all day long, but we didn't have to go trucking anywhere. We walked 250 yards from where we stayed, and it was fine. So getting there, we flew from Sacramento to Anchorage and then to Nome. And then after we left Nome, which by the way was the biggest, you know, the most prevalent area for us to see things we hadn't seen otherwise. And then we went back to Anchorage. And when we were in both places, we rented a large four-wheel drive pickup to get us around, because we did, as you could imagine, we did a lot of driving. So let's see. Oh, the one thing that why we did a lot of driving is, though they say the sun goes down late, it never went down. So, so we would get up early in the morning, leave, maybe get home at 10:30 in the evening, and then sometimes go out again. Hopefully not that many times, but it was a long marathon for that reason. Okay, now, where did we stay? In Nome, we stayed at what's called the Nugget Inn. We stayed there because we were really late in planning, and the most preferred hotel, the Aurora, that had been booked months and months prior to that, because there are a lot of birding trips that, you know, that you pay plenty for, and they have those places booked way ahead. So, you know, the Nugget was fine. I mean, the people that worked there were very courteous and nice and easy to get along with, but the infrastructure of that place needed some upgrading. Let's put it that way. Let's see. And then when we were, in Alaska, in Anchorage, Lisa had arranged for us to stay at a non-occupied home that a friend of hers had that was being kind of upgraded, and whether they were going to sell it or not, we don't really know. But the nice part about it, we had a room, each one of us had a room to ourselves. There was nothing in the room, but we had sleeping bags, and everything was great. And we operated out of that Anchorage area for the entire time that we were close to there before we left to the third place we stayed at, which was a nice lodge about 7 miles from the entrance to Denali National Park. And from that place, we again drove up to Fairbanks. We drove down to Seward, which is a port town south. And I'll show you some of these things on the map in a few minutes. And at Seward, we actually went out on about a 5-hour, if I can remember, maybe 6 day boat trip to the large bay, Resurrection Bay there. It wasn't actually a birding pelagic trip, but the people that ran, there were quite a number of people on the boat. I'd say 50 or 60, I'm not sure. It was a big vessel. But whenever we came to some area where there were particularly birds we were interested, we could let the people know there, and they would stop, and we would be able to see them as best we could. So that was a nice add-on for where we were at. Now, let's see where we're at here. Okay, the weather, Alaska. It varied from everything from about the low to mid 30s with high winds and snow on Nome, not all the time, but enough to make you a little bit concerned sometimes. To the last couple of days, we were up near Fairbanks, which is, by the way, north of Anchorage. We had balmy 84-degree temperatures, if you can imagine. Global warming coming, who knows, but that's not the usual Fairbanks, Alaska weather. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some maps up. Let's see where we're at. Okay, now this is, here we are, Anchorage, and I'll get over to Nome is basically up in this area right here, but I have another map I'll go to next. Hang on, there. This is a little bit better. Here's Anchorage, where we flew into. There's Fairbanks. There's the park. There's Nome. So you can see we didn't walk to Nome. We had to fly to Nome, obviously. So let's go down to the next one. Let's go to the next one. Okay, here is Nome. This was the hotbed of our birding. We saw, it's a rough frontier town. I wouldn't say rough, that's not the term. The people there are nice. There's a lot of local people there, like Inuits, and a lot of the main source of revenue, if you can imagine, that still goes on there is gold mining. The town was founded in like 1909, and there was a huge gold rush there. And it still goes on, but not to the extent that it used to, but it's still a function. And then here, there are 3 roads, as you can see, right out of here, right out here, and they all are significant roads that we traveled to go birding. And then we were also here, this place, Cape Nome, juts out into the Bering Sea over here in Norton Sound here. It's it's where we had some of the most severe weather, but you know, it wasn't that bad. If it got too bad, you could just climb back into the truck again and then sort of warm up. Sometimes it was so cold that you didn't want to get back out. And then over in this area, there is the Nome River outlet, and that is another great area where we birded at. So I'll show you a little bit about the town. This is Nome, and when I was in Anchorage, I met a person there that had traveled back and forth to Nome. He was a electronics maintenance type person for about 15 years, he told me. And he said the best thing you can do to describe Nome is old. And that really is the way it is there. Everything is quite old, but functional. And like I said, the people were fine. We never had any problems with anybody anywhere, except one policeman that Liam may want to talk to you about, but that's something else. And it's like, hey, here's another house there. But that's kind of how the entire town looks. In the harbor, what do you got? You got a dredger, and dredgers are all over Nome. Now, when I say Nome, I really mean that entire area that I showed you. The city of Nome is a small portion of the Nome area. And I think the population there is not much more than about maybe 3,500 people, something like that. I'm not quite sure. Let's see. All right, and then when we went to Denali, we stayed at about this area in a nice lodge, right about in here. We were just not very far from getting into the main road that goes into Denali, and I think Liam may talk to you a little bit about that later. And then there's also the Denali Highway, which goes up through this area towards Fairbanks. So that is about it. The next thing you'll see is here. This is when we now turn it over and we get to see some photos of the birds. And we every day, most of the time, Liam was out there, and so was I and the rest of us. But anyway, now how do I turn this over to Liam?
I think you can stop sharing, and then Liam can share.
Okay, stop sharing. Bam. Okay.
And then Liam can start sharing.
Okay, good.
Okay. Is that good? Okay.
There we go.
And you can mute now also, JT.
Do what? Leave?
No, you can mute your microphone now.
Yeah.
Unless you want to talk.
No.
Okay, so since JT covered the where and why mostly, this is just photos. So this is starting in Nome. Top right photo is from our hallway in the Nugget Inn. And it was our hallway because we made way more noise than anyone else, mostly these two people. And so that was a nice place, especially because it wasn't 27 degrees in there. It was like 47 degrees. So then bottom left is, what is this? This is a bar / restaurant out along the coast near Safety Sound. And they have about $10,000 bills all around the walls signed by every person that has visited this building, which is pretty cool. And we tended to be tired enough every single day that we passed this place. We would say, do we need to go here today? Yes, every day. So we got to know these people pretty well, and they had actually just bought this place. So that was nice. And then bottom right was our first, I think it's our first day at about 10 p.m. and it looks like the morning. And that's just right in Nome, like 5 minutes from the airport. Up here, top left, is the first night we were in Nome. This is taken at like 1 in the morning when we were still walking all over the place. Because we weren't able to rent our truck until the second day, so we walked a whole lot the first day. Mike walked even farther than the rest of us, but that's a different story. And let's see, these two buildings are both, I guess, fishing cabins out along the coast. There's maybe something like 100 of these cabins all littered along the coast, where during the fishing season, a lot of people from Nome and other towns come and collect in those. This photo of JT and Mike in shorts and Lisa is from, it's what's called the Curlew Hill near the end of the Cougarock Road, which is where it's a big giant hill about 75 miles from Nome. And on the top is where bristle-thighed curlews breed. So we were hiking up to see them, and it was probably around 30 degrees and snowing and windy. And Mike was wearing shorts and water sandals, so that went well. And then bottom left is on the Teller Road, right after we came out of a crazy whiteout at the top of the pass, which you can see kind of up in the background, is looking back on where we had just been. And we couldn't see more than about 1 foot in front of the car. So it would have been bad if there was another car, but luckily that didn't happen. Okay, so Nome birds. Let's see, so specialties in Nome are either birds that we have on the coast or of California, or that migrate through California. They're all in breeding plumage. So these are all from Cape Nome, which is a really nice place to see flying birds close up, because there's just a constant stream of birds commuting back and forth from wherever they're feeding for the day. So in the morning and the evening, Cape Nome, you can just see hundreds and hundreds of birds constantly flying by. So up top right is our surf scoters. They're not very common in Nome, but we maybe only saw 2 or 3 groups of them. white-winged scoters, which are a lot more common, groups of like 75, it was pretty normal. And then black scoters, which are the one scoter that you'll often see inland also in the Nome Peninsula. And that's the one that's most rare for us here in California. Harlequin ducks are awesome and are everywhere in Nome. But especially there was this same group of them the first day that we went to Cape Nome, we didn't know anything about it, and we spent 20 minutes there. And then every day for the rest of our time in Nome, we spent more time there because it was so nice. So by the end, Mike and I actually spent the last 3 hours in the middle of the night before our plane flight out of Nome at Cape Nome, half sleeping, looking at Harlequin ducks. Let's see, some other, I guess we have red-breasted mergansers on the coast of California, but they're all in breeding plumage there, and there's a whole ton of them, so those are really awesome to see. And then Eiders are kind of a specialty of that part of Alaska. Common Eiders are common. They're pretty much everywhere along the coast and on Safety Sound. And then king Eiders, I think we maybe saw 4 total. They're pretty rare at that time of year in June. But this male, we had been driving along the road and another birder stopped us and he said, "Hey, did you guys see that king eider that you passed 2 miles ago?" And we said, "No." And so he actually drove back with us and showed it to us. And this is way, way, way far away. All you could see is its rainbow-colored head in the grass, but that was pretty sweet. And I think that was one of the birds none of us had ever seen before. Here is black scoters on one of the ponds, on one of the roads out of Nome. You tend to be able to get a lot better looks at stuff on those roads. So male is the bottom left, and the female is the top right. And this was a group of about 20 of them, and they were actually whistling, which is how we knew. We were just driving along, and I heard all these weird whistles, and I thought, whoa, that is a weird group of people over there. And then I looked, and it was a bunch of scoters, so that was pretty cool. Another specialty in Nome is the alcids. So I guess common murres are pretty much, you can pretty much find those anywhere on the coast of California. They are common. And then the thick-billed murre is actually still pretty hard to find in Nome. But where I got all these photos was, it seemed like every day there was a new one of these birds, just 1 or 2, that would hang out right in the water, like 20 feet off of the end of Cape Nome. So it was always cool to see which new bird would be hanging around. So this thick-billed murre was there one day. The parakeet auklet was there for a couple days, which is pretty rare, so a whole bunch of people rushed out for that one. And then I think the black guillemot might have been there our entire time. And that black guillemot probably doesn't come any farther west regularly than the Nome Peninsula. They're mostly up in way northern Canada, Greenland, the Northeast. So that's a specialty of Nome. Loons. That's probably my favorite part of Nome, is that every loon is in breeding plumage and there are hundreds of loons everywhere. So Pacific loons are definitely Pacific and red-throated loons are the most common. Red-throated are mostly inland on all the ponds and lakes. And Pacific loons are absolutely everywhere on the ocean. There were some mornings from Cape Nome that we counted over 200 Pacific loons passing by. And then bottom right are Arctic loons, which are pretty rare. And that's a big time specialty in Nome. And you can tell from this photo because of the white stripes. Well, it's hard on this photo, but the white stripes on their neck are a lot more bold, and their heads are darker, and then they've got the big white patch on their side right at the water line. So it took us, I think it might have taken us like 4 days of looking for those to finally find these two. Common loon, amazingly, is the rarest of the 5 loons. We only saw, I think, 2 or 3 in our entire time in Nome. But this one here was one of a pair that we got to see pretty close. That was cool. And then yellow-billed loons, I think all the ones we saw were at Cape Nome. And there was one morning when I think 4 different ones flew over us, which was really awesome. 2 more specialties, breeding specialties in Nome are Glaucus Gulls, just maybe the most common bird on the Nome Peninsula. They're just hundreds and hundreds of them everywhere, but they're pretty amazing to look at. So it's hard to get tired of them. And as you can see, they blend in well with all the ice flows. And then Savins gulls, which are kind of an offshore ocean bird in California, breed in this part of Alaska. So we got to see a lot of those. I think at the Safety Sound Bridge, where it flows into the ocean, we had a flock of about 80 of them one day, which was really cool to see. Oh, and actually, this particular Savins gull, JT and I stopped from the car maybe 50 yards away, and we crawled through the sand right up to where we were about 10 feet away, and it just kept eating bugs off the water, and it never had any reaction, so that was really awesome. Okay, Aleutian Turns are another specialty of that part of Alaska, and there's a big colony of them that hangs out at the Nome River mouth, just a few miles outside of Nome, and you can walk 30 feet away from this big colony, which is really cool. And they vastly outnumber the Arctic terns at that one spot, and then they're super difficult to find in every other part of the area. And then this is a Parasitic Jager. It looks a lot like a long-tailed Jager. The long-tailed Jager has a lot longer tail. And this is not totally a specialty of Alaska, but it's a really cool thing to see a lot of Jagers breeding in the Nome area. Another really cool part of being in Nome in the summer is seeing a lot of birds in their, shorebirds especially, in their breeding plumage. So up here top left is a dunlin, which we rarely get to see when they're this colorful. They're usually just gray and white and blend in with the fog and the mud. So this is pretty stunning to see. We didn't see a lot of them, but JT said before the trip that one of the things he most wanted a photo of was a breeding plumage dunlin, and that's his photo. So, and then wandering tattler you can find on the coast of California in certain places, but they actually breed inland on creeks and streams in Nome, so really different from where they usually are. This one's on the coast like it should be, but or shouldn't be, I don't know. But they're in breeding plumage, so they're much more striking. They have all this cool stripe, they're barred patterning. Red phalarope, that was one of the things I most wanted to see, especially in their breeding plumage. There's a lot of them around. Some of what they really like to do is they swim right into the heaviest surf where all the big giant waves are crashing, and they just swim right into the middle of that, and then they feed like inside the waves. So this is actually about the calmest water that you'll see a red phalarope in. But those are breeding females. They are opposite of most other birds in that way. The females are very colorful, and the males are well, kind of boring. And then The redneck phalarope, there's just hundreds of them everywhere. Anywhere that water exists in Nome has between like 1 and 200 redneck phalaropes. But they look really nice, so it's hard to get tired of that. Bar-tailed godwit, that is from our first night in Nome. The very first place we walked to from the airport, we got to see this male bar-tailed godwit, like a 5-minute walk from our hotel, which was really awesome. And we didn't see a whole bunch of them after that, but every once in a while we'd see a couple. Western sandpipers look really nice up there, really colorful, and they're everywhere. Ruddy turnstones are kind of hard to find, but this one hung out for a while with a black turnstone, which was really cool to see those together at the Nome River mouth. And they're really awesome looking. And that photo of the ruddy turnstone is taken at 1:30 a.m. So all of these photos are from one spot. I forget what road, but there's a big, as you're driving, you look up to your right and there's just a big hill. And if you were in California, you would think, wow, that's a hill. On top of it might be, it's not special. But in Nome, if you drive on top of a random hill, you might find all these crazy birds that like the hill and breed on the hill. So both ptarmigans were pretty easy to find in the spot. Surf birds, which is a really strange thing to see them walking around in fields when they're normally on the rocky coastline in California. And then, I labeled this wrong. This is an American golden plover. And you can tell that because the black in the vent area exists. On Pacific, it's white in that area. And this white border on the neck is much thicker in an American also. We had been looking for rock sandpipers that breed at this spot, and we did not find those. We also have breeding red knots on this hill. Let's see. So this is all from a spot called the Bear River, which is at the end of the Council Road, which is the road that Cape Nome and Safety Sound are on. And so Bear River is a big, it's not too big, but it's a fairly big spruce forest along a river. It's pretty much the only habitat like that for many miles. So a lot of birds that like coniferous forests tend to collect here. So we got out of the car and this pine grosbeak was just standing in the middle of the road, and we got to walk up pretty close to that. So that was really cool. White-winged crossbills and boreal chickadees are both specialty birds pretty much just from this one spot. And we got to see those very close. Blackpoll warblers are really common through a lot of Alaska in summer, but not very, well, actually, they're less common in Nome, so this was a nice place to see them. And then American tree sparrows are very common everywhere, but fun to see every time. These are a few specialties from Nome. I guess I've said that a lot, but these are seen in very few other places besides this part of Alaska. And those are hoary redpolls, which are maybe equally common with common redpolls in Nome. And we actually had a flock of about 150 of them at Cape Nome one day, which, as far as I know, is kind of unprecedented. They're usually in small flocks, so that was cool. White wagtail, we went to Teller specifically to look for this one thing, like a all-day drive. And luckily, as we were driving through, this white thing flew across the road and landed on a house. And I said, if it lands on a house, it's a white wagtail. And then it was, so that was nice. And then blue throats, we got to see a few times. probably might be my favorite bird ever. And the first time we got to see it was doing a display flight where they fly up in a spiral way up high, and then they float down and kind of drift down like a leaf, which is really, really cool to watch. Let's see. These are a few of the rarest birds that we saw in Nome. Let's see. These are some stories. Okay. This Stenniger's scoter is a relatively new species, like within the last year, I think. It was split off of white-winged scoter, and it is there was a three-way split. So white-winged scoter is North American, Stenniger scoter is Asian, and there's one in Europe. I think it's velvet scoter. But so Stenniger scoters are, I guess not a lot is known about their population in the Nome area because they're so new, but they're very hard to find. And I spent about 5 days scanning every single flock of scoters and finally found this one. You can tell compared to this white-winged scoter here because the white-winged scoter has kind of brownish sides. The Stenniger scoter has solid black and then hard to make out, but it's got this really kind of crazy looking big blocky knob thing on its bill, which white-winged doesn't really have. And then the colors of the bills are actually flipped upside down between the two. And let's see, the Ross's gull is a fun story. So on I think only our second day in Nome, we had driven out to the river mouth. I'm kind of scoping around, trying to find something amazing. It's not working. It's extremely cold. We don't really want to be there very long. And there's a group of people like way, way out far away on the beach. And there's a guy in a car in this really deep sand that the entire time we were there, no one else dared dry out on this sand. But this one person was parked like 400 yards out in the deep sand. And so there's like a crowd forming around this car. And then suddenly this guy sprints back the 300 or 400 yards towards us, and he gets 100 yards away and he yells, "Ross's gull, Ross's gull." And so we all are running. You can barely run because of how deep the sand is. So we're kind of stumbling that way. And finally we get up to it, and everyone's pointing and everyone's got scopes. And the Ross's gull is sitting about 40 feet away on the beach. And a Ross's gull is extremely rare, pretty much almost anywhere in the entire world, especially this part of Alaska. Just a really, really sweet bird. And then when we looked in the car that was parked next to us, the guy sitting in the front seat was David Sibley, and he had found the Ross's gull. So that was pretty unbelievable. And then it got more unbelievable because then he was stuck in the sand. So then Lisa led the push David Sibley out of the sand effort, and she was constantly pushing and directing everyone, and it was crazy, and I can't believe that happened. So that was crazy. And then the redneck stint was people had been seeing these, or maybe just this one, on and off. The tide, when the tide is low, all the shorebirds come in to the river mouth, and when the tide is in, so when the water is high, you can't find a shorebird anywhere. I don't know where they go, but they go somewhere else. So we kept missing the tide times and messing them up. So we just could never find this. So finally, on the very last night, we had been out all day, but everyone wanted to get some sleep before we left. And I didn't. So I went out to the beach one more time. This is probably 1 a.m. And I called JT, and he doesn't answer the first time, and he doesn't answer the second time. And so I'm just in the truck by myself. And I call him a third time, and he's half asleep, and he goes, "What?" And I say, do you want to see a redneck stint before we go home? And he said, okay. So I drove back and I got everyone and I brought them down to the beach. And we stood on the beach while this redneck stint walked about 5 feet away from us, right around our feet for 20 minutes. So that was really fun. Okay, so from there we went to Anchorage, and we didn't, there wasn't a lot of successful birding in Anchorage, but there were definitely some cool spots. The Glen Alps Trailhead is this top right spot. This is Chugach State Park, which is kind of up in the higher elevations around Anchorage. Really scenic, not a whole lot of birds. We were trying to find white-tailed ptarmigans, and we did not find those. And then this other spot is where there are a lot of mallards, is Westchester Lagoon in Anchorage. And they have these little signs about redneck grebes all over the place. And so something that Westchester Lagoon is well known for is they occasionally have groups of Hudsonian godwits that come and hang out there in the summer. So that's what we were hoping for, and that's what was sitting there. So that was pretty nice. And actually, now that I think about it, they weren't there when we got there. And then as we kept walking around, they flew in. So that was really nice. And then greater scops were everywhere in this area. Tons of other ducks also. And then really the only thing we were paying attention to most of the time at Westchester Lagoon was JT was constantly getting dive bombed by this adult mew gull. And they make a really hilarious kind of screeching sound. So it would just it was just chasing him all over the place, making this super annoying loud noise, and everyone was just staring at him. So so then we finally figured out why, because these little chicks were in the grass. Not a great idea by the mew gull to have its chicks out on a lawn where a bunch of people walk, but I don't know why it did that. Oh, this was cool. So this is JT taking photos of a pair of Arctic terns, and then this is that photo. It was really fun to watch. They probably let him and I get 10 feet away, and they just kept sharing fish. It was really pretty amazing. This also at Westchester Lagoon. So is this. This is a courting pair of redneck grebes. There's tons of them at this spot. I think we had like maybe 50 redneck grebes on Westchester Lagoon. This top one on the left is pretty much the only one that we got really close to. But JT got a whole long series of photos of this courtship display that these two were doing. And they make, the sounds they make sound like the alien from the movie Alien. So that's pretty bizarre. What is this? Seward? So let's see, after, I guess while we were still in Anchorage, we did spend a day, or what happened was we didn't have any plans really for one of the days in Anchorage, and it was real. I woke up early, like 2 in the morning, because I wanted to go look for birds, and then I thought I should probably come up with something else to do right now. So I looked online, and I found that in about 6 hours, there was a boat that had just enough spots for us in Seward, which is about 3 hours away, 2 hours, something like that. And so I let them get like 2 more hours of sleep, and then I woke them up and I said, okay, let's go to Seward and get on a boat. And luckily they said, okay. So we took I think it was a 6-hour trip around Resurrection Bay. Let's see, this view in the bottom left, in every direction that you look, this is the view. There's just these amazing range of mountains in almost an entire circle around the bay. And let's see, this is a humpback whale tail. I think we saw a few of them on this thing, on this boat trip. This was from the harbor. And then this is Fox Island. Something I didn't know when I planned this boat trip was that they took a lunch stop on an island in the bay. So we got to stop at a resort on Fox Island and eat a specially made sandwich and then keep going. There wasn't very many birds there, but we did see some puffins in this little bay in the island, so that was pretty nice. Okay, so at the mouth of Resurrection Bay, where it starts to meet the ocean, there was probably 30,000 common murres just absolutely coating the ocean. There's huge nesting colonies on all the rocks at the mouth of the bay. Glaucus winged gulls were really common here. We didn't really see very many anywhere else, maybe a couple in Nome, but adults are pretty hard to find in a lot of places, so seeing a bunch of them was really cool. There are also some really big black-legged kittiwake colonies on Resurrection Bay. A lot of them they were mixed with puffins and cormorants. And marbled murrelets. I don't think we saw any from the boat, but afterward we drove along the coast or along the shoreline of the bay, and we found a spot where we had about 8 of them, which was very cool. Here's some other specialties of this area. Pelagic cormorants are really common. They look a fair amount like red-faced cormorant, which was what we were looking for. So you have to look at all of them very closely. And let's see, tufted and horned puffins are in a lot of the colonies. What's kind of cool about some of the puffin colonies is you'd come up to, the boat would be up against a big cliff, like 200-300 feet tall. And the captain of the boat told us that the tufted puffins nest in burrows way high up at the top of the cliff. So you'd see all these birds flying around everywhere, like 100 feet up, and then 3 times as high, you'd see little tiny tufted puffins flying around way high up in the sky. There was probably about, for every 5 horned puffins, there was 1 tufted puffin, so there's not nearly as many. Let's see, this red-faced cormorant group here, Lisa and I, when we were on the boat, saw these and said like, whoa, those could be them. And I just took a bunch of pictures of every cormorant in this entire day so I could look back on the pictures. And then when I got home from this, I looked at the pictures and was able to pick these out. So whatever that counts for, yeah, kind of. And then Northwestern Crow is no longer a species, but we wanted to see it anyway because that was part of the reason we went there. So it's just a crow with a different name. They make a kind of a funnier sound, so I guess that makes them cooler. Okay, Denali, I guess this was like the last 3.5, 4-ish days of the trip. Okay, so up here top right was, as we're driving to Denali from Anchorage, it's relatively rare to be able to see all of the Mount Denali, Mount McKinley, fully showing, be in the area for very long. So the chances of you seeing it are, the time we could see it on the entire trip, it was wide open. So this was us freaking out about it, and then this was JT's picture of it. And then bottom left was one of the days while we were driving through Denali. This is me taking a picture past Lisa in the driver's seat, where this moose doesn't even know we're there. And we saw quite a few moose in that area. And then here is, I can't remember where, but somewhere along the Denali Highway. I think this is where we saw a Bohemian waxwing. So that was cool. I think these 2 things here on the left are both views from the Denali Highway. And up here is in Paxson, which is not a town, it's sort of just a named place. But there is an airstrip here and one bed and breakfast. And the guy who lives in the bed and breakfast is one of the most famous birders on the continent. And we did get to meet him. He gave us some advice on where to find things, and we didn't find any of the things. But that was a pretty cool spot to be. And let's see. So Canada jays are all over the place in a lot of mainland Alaska, but Denali is pretty thick with them. I think the last time we were in there, we went on a little hike and had a group of like 30 of them maybe. And it was pretty hilarious watching JT spin in circles trying to get pictures of those. And then this trumpeter swan, we did see some nesting trumpeter swans along the Denali Highway. Not very many, but that was pretty cool to see. And then Arctic warbler was something that we were, they don't always arrive at the same time in Nome, and we happened to be there in a year where they were not really around yet. So that was a big time target for us that we didn't see in Nome. So luckily I heard this one as we were driving by somewhere on the Denali Highway, and we were able to get out and see that. And then we got to show like 3 or 4 other people who were also driving by. So that was really nice. And then this is Myrtle yellow rumped warbler. So sort of the eastern subspecies, but they breed in Alaska. White throat instead of yellow. And they're everywhere, of course. This was one of our biggest targets of the whole trip. They can be pretty hard to find even when you know where they are. So we actually had met a group of guys in Nome from Colorado, and they were actually like really top birders in Colorado. And they told us that like the first day we met them, they said, hey, we should, whenever we see each other, we should keep updating each other on what we're finding. And then, so all through our time in Nome, we kept meeting up with them random places and sharing information. And then as we're in the airport to leave Nome, I see the guys next to us. And so I start talking to them, and they're pretty much doing the exact same trip as us. So we kept meeting these guys throughout our entire Alaska trip and sharing information from what we had seen. And so they got us on where this 3-toed woodpecker had been. And this was actually, we got to see this thing so close, it landed on the ground about 5 feet away from where JT was standing. And this was on the Denali Highway, second to last day of the trip. And then, let's see, while we were staying in Denali, there wasn't as much to do as we thought there was going to be, especially because it worked out that there's a new bus system, so we actually couldn't go into the park on the buses. So then we had a whole day with nothing to do. So we went to Fairbanks. I did a bunch of eBird research on where to go. These pictures are from, what is it called? The Kramer Fields Waterfowl Refuge, something like that. It's one of the few places in that part of Alaska where they get nice amounts of migrating waterfowl. It's very kind of swampy, mixed with big grassy fields. So these are all Fairbanks birds. Yellow-bellied flycatcher is found almost nowhere in the entire state of Alaska, except this 1 quarter-mile stretch of a random highway out of Fairbanks, where there's a few breeding pairs. So I don't think anyone had seen them in a couple of years, but I found that was a previous location. So we drove up there, I think about 2 in the morning this day, and we stopped at this spot, didn't really hear anything, and then I heard one. We walked over to where it was, and I played the call 1 time so it would come out for us to see, and it flew about 2 feet away from our feet and landed on the ground. So that was pretty amazing. And I don't think any of us had seen it before, I can't remember. Solitary sandpiper was at that refuge, and Lisa had never seen that before, and we hadn't seen it yet on the trip, so that was very cool. Upland Sandpiper there's a road that's good for sharp-tailed grouse south of Fairbanks. It's like 30 minutes south, so we did a whole extra hour to look for those and didn't find them, but on the drive back out of the road, Lisa spotted no, wait a second. JT spotted these. That doesn't happen very much. So we got a couple Upland Sandpipers, which was really nice. We had tried for those a couple spots. That was very fun. And then Rusty Blackbird, Mike Scram has told me over 800 times this year that all he wanted to see in Alaska was a Rusty Blackbird, even though it looks exactly like a brewer's blackbird. But he got to see that, so congratulations to Mike. And that is it. So I don't know if it seems like a lot of stuff went on in the chat that I didn't see. I don't know if there was questions or anything.
There are a few questions in the chat.
Okay,
Did you hear the Upland Sandpiper call?
We didn't. I really wish that we would have. That's a really amazing song that they do.
And your dad posted a really cute picture of a little Liam with Sibley. And let's see, somebody had to drop out because they were having bad reception. There was another question in here. Let's see, I'm trying to find it. JT was the boat trip out of Fort Seward, the Kenai Fjords boat tour. If not, does anyone else remember the name of it?
It was not that. Well, we didn't go to the Kenai Fjords, so it was not that. I can probably find that. Who asked that?
I think Shelly Wingo.
Oh, okay. I can. I'll find that for her. Let's see. Don said that rusty blackbirds are prettier in molt. That is true. They make some really cool noises, so that was different. Did you see any bears or other animals? Lots of moose. I don't think we didn't see a grizzly bear on a trip to Alaska. I didn't really think about that until now, but that's kind of sad. It was mostly because we couldn't go into Denali, which was where we were hoping to see a lot of those things. Did you see anything else?
Did you see any other whales or any seals or anything?
We saw one sea otter on our boat trip, and it was the first time Mike had ever seen a sea otter. So that was his favorite part of the whole day. So that was pretty fun.
Nice. Somebody said you guys saw an Arctic fox.
Did we? I think we saw a red fox.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Muskox.
I don't know. I think Lisa put that on there.
We did see muskox. That was a good point JT made. We saw a bunch of muskox in Nome, and I actually have a picture of Mike getting way too close to one.
Owls?
How many owls?
Owls. We looked a lot for multiple owls. We looked for great gray owl. We looked for boreal. We looked for, what's the other one? Hawk owl. We looked hard for all of those. And, we looked for snowy owl. We failed on all of them. We saw some short-eared owls in Nome, yeah, which was cool.
And what was your total avian species count?
Let's see. I believe in the I think about 175. We were trying really hard to get every new species. So we went a number of places where we didn't really need to go see a house sparrow in Alaska, but we wanted to add it for the list. So we did a lot of that stuff.
Did you see a snowshoe hare?
Oh, we did see snowshoe hares, yes.
And Don wants to know how many lifers each person got.
Wow. I don't remember how many Lisa got, but it was somewhere in the high 40s, 50 range. I know Mike got about 27, I think. I think JT got around 15 to 20. Yeah, Lisa said she got 51. That's pretty cool. I got 10, I think, which was quite a few more than I was expecting. So that was really cool.
Liam, how about mosquitoes?
Oh, wow. A lot of places, no mosquitoes, but there was a few places around Anchorage and one place specifically called Earthquake Park, where we walked into Earthquake Park for about 3 minutes and sprinted out with mosquitoes like going into your clothes, crawling into your hair, just totally violating you in every possible way. And that was terrible. So we never went back to that place.
All right. Well, maybe we're going to have to give a big round of applause to Liam and JT and Lisa and Mike Slam. I mean, this was, again, an epic adventure. Everyone does need to go birding in Nome, and Liam can lead you there.
Yes. I'm still considering doing another one of these trips this next summer, so that might be something to watch for.
Right. So not only did they have just an incredible trip with birds, I mean, you realize that most people don't get to see Denali, the mountain, because it's always clouded. So they were very lucky too to do that. So thanks again. I mean, please give them your comments. I mean, this was just fantastic. I mean, I just was in awe at all the birds, and I loved hearing all the stories. I'm sure we all were.
Yeah, thanks, Liam and JT, Lisa.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next month. It's the members photo show, and if you're interested in showing your photos, contact me and we'll get you lined up. And hopefully Zoom will end someday, so we'll all be together. So anyway, thanks again. What a great evening. Loved it.
Pretty good. Thanks. Thanks.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Night.
Bye.
Night. Bye.
Well, thanks, JT and Liam. That was great.
Yeah, for sure. That was fun.
Yeah. You might have other chapters wanting you to zoom in with them. So it should be recorded it.
Yes, right.
When are you thinking of going again?